Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Math with Dr. War. Today we're going to evaluate trig functions given constraints. Now before we begin, we need some foundational stuff going on here. First thing you need to know is the definition for sine, cosine, and tangent. Many of you have been taught sohcahtoa. So remember that sine theta is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine theta is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tan theta is opposite over adjacent. So we have sine, cosine, and tan. Now you can find cosecant. This would be the reciprocal, so this would be hypotenuse over opposite. You can also find secant, which is the reciprocal of cosine, which is hypotenuse over adjacent. And you can find cot theta, which is the reciprocal of tan. So that would be adjacent over opposite. Because we're given constraints, you're going to need to know what are your definitions for sine, cosine, and tangent given the coordinate plane. You have to know that sine theta is y over r. And you need to know that cosine is x over r. And you need to know that tan is y over x. And then you can figure out the cosecant, secant, and cotangent. Those are pretty easy. Always remember they're the reciprocal. Now, the reason that you need to know their definition in the coordinate plane is that one of the sides are going to be missing, and you're going to have to use the Pythagorean Theorem to find it. And for us, our Pythagorean Theorem is going to be x squared plus y squared equals to r squared. Now, because they're giving us constraints, you're going to need to know this little saying right here. All students take calculus. Now, the all is in the first quadrant. It means that sine, cosine, and tangent, everyone is positive here, all 6. In the second quadrant, only sine is positive. In the third quadrant, only tan is positive because that's take. And then in the fourth quadrant, calculus, which is your C, cosine is positive, which means everyone else is negative. Once you can remember all students take calculus and know your definitions for sine, cosine, and tangent, and know your definitions in terms of the coordinate plane and the Pythagorean Theorem, we're all set. So let's take a look at a problem. So here I'm given cosine theta equals 4 over 7, and then they told me that sine theta is less than 0, and I need to find the 5 remaining trig functions. Now, because I'm given a constraint, I have to figure out where does this lie in the coordinate plane. So remember, I have all students take calculus. Now, cosine is positive, and cosine is positive in quadrant number 1 and quadrant number 4. Because all are positive here and only cosine is positive in number 4. Now over here they said that sine is less than 0, so sine is negative. Okay, here all is positive, here sine is positive, which means that sine is negative in quadrants 3 and quadrant number 4. So who do these two have in common? Quadrant number 4. So this function is going to be occurring in quadrant number 4, which is down here. So I'm going to draw my triangle. Here's my theta. Now remember, cosine theta is 4 over 7. So I need to know what it is in terms of x, y, and r. And remember, cosine is x over r. That's an x. Which means, knowing your coordinate plane, this is 4, because this is the x-axis. R represents your hypotenuse, so this is 7. So therefore, what is missing is y. Because remember, this line represents your y value. And in order to find y, we need the Pythagorean Theorem, which will be x squared plus y squared equals to r squared. So I have 4 squared plus y squared equals 7 squared. 16 plus y squared equals 49. Solving for y, I'm going to subtract 16 from both sides. Y squared equals 33. But we don't want y squared, so y equals to the square root of 33. However, look to see where your y is in your coordinate plane. Your y is, or your triangle, if you want to call it that, well, it is a triangle, what am I talking about? So your triangle is in the 4th quadrant. If you are in the 4th quadrant, it means that your x value is positive and your y value is negative. Our y value is square root of 33. Therefore, this is going to be a negative value. We have our cosine, which is 4 over 7. Therefore, secant is going to be the reciprocal, 7 over 4. Okay, we have 1. Next, I'm going to go for sine theta. Now I know sine theta is opposite over hypotenuse. And if I wrote that in terms of the coordinate plane, it's going to be y over r. And I know my y is negative square root 33 over, and my r is 7. So I have sine. Now, from sine, I can actually find cosecant. So cosecant is going to be the reciprocal. So it's still going to be negative, but it's going to be 7 over the square root of 33. But remember I did a video on rationalizing your denominator? This is not acceptable. So your professor is going to want you to rationalize the denominator. So you're going to take negative 7 over the square root of 33, and you're going to times that top and bottom by square root of 33. So your answer is negative 7 square root 33 over 33. And that's your cosecant. Now, I know that tan theta is going to be opposite over adjacent, which is going to be y over x. So again, I know what my y is. It's negative square root 33 over, what's your x? It is 4. So I have my tan. If you have tan, you can find cot. So cot theta is going to be the reciprocal, so it's going to be negative, and it's going to be 4 over the square root of 33. But it's simple to actually rationalize this. Basically, it's going to be negative 4 square root 33 over 33. So it's basically, notice that when you multiply, the denominator becomes an integer, and then up here you have your radical sign with your integer. I hope that makes sense. So notice we got our 5. We got secant, sine, cosecant, tan, and cot. Okay, here I have tan theta equals to 2 and sine theta less than 0. So again, let's get our little triangle. All students take calculus. Okay, so tan is positive. So tan is positive in the all and the t. So that's in quadrant number 1 and quadrant number 3. Okay, sine is less than 0. So sine is less than 0 in quadrant number 3 and 4. So who do they have in common? They both have quadrant number 3 in common. Quadrant 3. If I draw my triangle, it is going to be in quadrant 3. And there's my theta. Always remember your theta goes towards the origin. Now, so we have tan theta, which is 2 over 1. Okay, remember your definition for tan. It's y over x. So your y is 2, which is here, and your x is 1, which is here. But you probably are saying to yourself, but didn't you say that, you're looking at the coordinate plane? Yes, you are. So because you're in quadrant 3, this is a -1, and this is a -2. But remember, -2 over -1 is +2. Who do we have to find? We have to find r. So we have x squared plus y squared equals r squared. -1 squared plus -2 squared equals r squared. 1 plus 4 equals r squared. 5 equals r squared. Therefore, the square root of 5 is r. So your r is 5. So we have that x equals to -1, y equals to -2, and r equals to the square root of 5. And remember, r is your hypotenuse, and that will always be a positive number. Okay, so we can find the 5 other trig functions. So again, if they gave me tan, which is 2 over 1, then I know that cot theta is going to be the reciprocal, 1 over 2. Sine theta, I know that sine is going to be y over r. So I'm like, okay, what's y? That's -2, and r is square root 5. But remember, no denominators with radicals in there. So when you rationalize, this will be -2 square root 5 over +5. So again, it's like you bring this up and then make this a normal integer. Now, if you want your cosecant, don't go from here, go from here. Because when you write the reciprocal, it's going to be negative, and it's just going to be the square root 5 over 2. And notice that your radical is in the numerator, so that's fine. Okay, let's get cosine. So your cosine theta is going to be x over r. Okay, what is x? X is -1. Your r is square root of 5. Okay, we're going to have to rationalize this. So this will be -1, and then this is the square root of 5 over 5. And you can write this as negative square root 5 over 5. And if I have cosine, I can find secant, which is the reciprocal. So again, don't go from here. You'll make a mess. Go from here. When you do the reciprocal from here, it's going to be just square root 5. Oh, let's not forget our negative over 1. So your answer is negative square root 5. So you have your 5 trig functions. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you're finished. Okay, the last one. So I know I did sine and cosine and tan, but let's see if they give you something like cosecant. So here I have that cosecant theta is -3 over 2. So cosecant theta is -3 over 2. Let's get our triangle. All students take calculus. Now cosecant is related to sine. So notice that your cosecant is negative and your tan is also negative. Okay, so if the cosecant is negative, then sine is negative. And where is sine negative? Sine is negative in quadrant 3 and quadrant 4. Now, where is tan negative? Because tan is less than 0. Tan is negative in quadrant number 2 and quadrant number 4. So who do they have in common? They have quadrant number 4. So let me draw my triangle over here. So we're in quadrant 4 again. That's over here. So now I know that cosecant is -3 over 2. I can find sine, which will be easy. Sine theta, because this will make your life so much easier. Sine theta will be the reciprocal, so this will be -2 over 3. And I know that sine is y over r. I don't want to be working with cosecant. I'll prefer to work with sine. So I know what cosecant is. I can find sine. With sine, it's easier for me. My mind works that way. So I know that sine is y over r. So this would be negative 2 over 3. So again, notice that negative 2 is your y here. 3 is your r here. So we're missing x. I'm going to now use the Pythagorean theorem, which is x squared plus y squared equals r squared. I don't know x. I do know y is negative 2 squared and r is 3 squared. So I have x squared plus 4 equals to 9. Solving for x, I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. X squared equals to 5, but I don't want x squared, so x will be the square root of 5. Now notice that because this is in the fourth quadrant, x would be positive. So this is fine. So x is positive radical 5, y has a value of negative 2, and r has a value of 3. And we can find the other 5. So let's find cosine. Now I know cosine is x over r, so that would be square root 5 over 3. Because remember, over here, cosine is positive. I can find secant theta, which will be the reciprocal. That would be 3 over radical 5. But remember, when I rationalize, it's going to be 3 radical 5 over 5. Tan theta, we know that is always y over x. Oh, let's see, what is our y? That's negative 2. Our x is going to be square root of 5. And remember, we need to rationalize, so that will be negative 2 square root 5 over 5. And again, notice that the only person that's supposed to be positive in quadrant number 4 is cosine. Sine has to be negative, and tan has to be negative. There's your negative. And last but not least, we can have cot. Cot is the reciprocal, so I'm going to go from here. And that would be the square root 5, and let's not forget our negative, over 2. And we don't need to rationalize this because the radical is in the numerator. So we have our 5 trig functions. We started off with cosecant. We found sine, cos, secant, tan, and cot. And you're finished. I hope this lesson has been helpful. Good luck in your examination. And remember, please like, subscribe, and share.